Welcome back to the next installment in my grid trading series. In this series I've started with a basic grid trader and I'm inviting suggestions from you as to how to improve that grid trader, and I'm trying as many of those suggestions as I can. So if you have suggestions, leave a comment and I'll try to get to as many as I can with that. For this video, the suggestion is to implement a trading range, so setting a high and low price and not trading outside that, or at least not buying above the top of that range and not selling below the bottom of that range. And the intent there is to minimize the number of outlying trades, because once the price hits a peak and then the price retreats, you're often left with a trade at the minimum or the maximum value that the price has reached over time, and those will just never go away. If you've just started watching with this video, I am building on code that has already been created in earlier videos. There is a playlist for the entire series, but you don't need to watch every video just to get to the beginning point here, because many of the videos simply implement a suggestion and then I go back to the base code again to start with the next. There will be a list in the description to the video that shows how you can get to this particular video through the stages of actual code development. So if you want to just go through from the beginning and see how this code has been developed, check that list in the description and then you can watch just those videos. Now, before I go on to actually implement this particular suggestion, there are some changes I want to make to the basic grid trader code. Some of that because I'm introducing some new functionality that will be used in later suggestions, and some just because I want to improve the code a little. So before I move on, I'm going to go back to the base version, this 1.003. I'm going to create a new version 2.000 from that. And I'm updating the major version number to 2 because this actually is not just a change to the internal code. There will be a visible change in the operation of the grid, but it will still be able to operate in the existing mode. So I'll still be able to compare the base version, but there will be some new features added. So that's step 1. I've created this version 2 folder by simply copying the version 1.003. Now 1.003 was the original base version as it had been updated through some code revisions. So I've taken that as the starting point for version 2, and I've ignored the specific suggestions that have come in between because they're not relevant to updating the base version. So this is version 2. I've changed the include statement here to update or to load version 2. And in the main, I've updated the version number, the magic number to match the version, because I just like to keep different magic numbers in case I'm running both this and the older version. And I've started with the comments here, version 2, updating the major version due to the functional change. Now the first thing I want to do here, I'm going to be changing some of the, let me go to the include here, include orchard. I'm going to change the names of these files. I called them position info, symbol info, trade, and also here I called this leg. I really should have named them the same as the class name. So if I just open leg, for example, the class is cleg base. I really should have used leg base as the file name. So I'm just going to make that change. At the same time though, I recognize that I'm going to be making some further changes in these classes or in these files that I really shouldn't do, given that those files are used in earlier versions. And if I change the behavior of them now, it affects the earlier version. So something else that I should have done from the beginning is have a way of versioning these files. So I'm going to do that. It will initially break the earlier versions, but I'm going to go back and fix the code for that. I won't make you watch me do that, but I will fix all the earlier version code so that it handles the version numbers. So I'll also just skip through and do that and then come back to you. Now I've made those changes. You can see in the include here in Orchard I have version 1 and version 2 now. Inside version 1 are the files I had before, expert, and I haven't changed the names of these files in the version 1. In version 2 though, I have expert, and then I have changed that file to leg base. Under trade, I have now position info custom, symbol info custom, and trade custom. So I've changed the file names there. For the version 2 grid trader, in the config file now, I've just added version 2 and I've changed the names of these files, position info custom, symbol custom, trade custom. In the earlier config files, and I've still got the file for version 1.007 here, all I've needed to do is add that version 1 to make these paths work. So I've done that through all the earlier versions so that if you download this from GitHub, then it will have that fix in there already. If I go back to the config for the current version 2, you can see I also have this persistence, which wasn't there in 1.003. It was something I added as part of one of the later suggestions, but I've decided to make that one of the standards because it's always good to have access to that persistence class. And the other thing I'm going to do before I go too much further, and I've got the config file open, in the leg file I had this include statement for Orchard Expert leg. I'm going to take that as well. I'm going to put that inside the config file, this config file. And of course that becomes version 2. And it is leg base. So what I'm trying to do here is all of the include statements for things that are in the common include area, I'm trying to put them all in the config file. That way if I do make a change like this, I can just go through one place and make all of those changes. Let me just make sure that this compiles. No, it doesn't. Let me just check that. Here, this is actually in the include files and I need to change these file names as well. So that's it for the first change where I'm simply changing the file names. I'll just update my comments in main, update the major version number. I've updated the include file names, which broke some of the earlier code. Yeah, my mistake. And I've made some refactoring to make any future dumb mistakes easier to fix. The next step is that I have some common functions here. I'm in the main file. If I scroll down, you can see I have trade allowed. And if I go back to the version 1.007 and look at the main file there, I actually changed the name of that to is trade allowed and I added the is new bar function. I'm going to take these functions and put them into a common include file rather than have them in every main file that comes along, just because if I do find a small error in here, I can fix it in one place. Now what I've done is to create a new folder here under version 2 that I've called common. I've created a file inside here, functions.mqh. That functions file now has is trade allowed and is new bar. I've modified the config file to include that functions file, common functions.mqh, and then in main I've taken those functions away. I've also changed this to is trade allowed. You'll remember that in the earlier version it was just called trade allowed, now it's is trade allowed. And I've added in this bit of code, which was in the version 1.007. I had some code in here. I've left that there with no function, I guess nothing to execute, just because it's useful to have an is new bar, and I'll just leave it there. I kept the persistence in the include files here in config, so I'll also add back the code where I created an instance of that gvar object. So I'm just initializing the new global variable with the key and then deleting it when I finish. I don't have anything where I'm going to use that global variable in this base class, but it's there ready to use as I make some of the customizations later. The next thing I want to do is move some of the common code from the leg class into the leg base class. I've noticed that there's some code that just never changes, and for the small number of cases where it is going to change, I'll be able to override that. So I'm going to move a lot of that code out of leg into leg base. First thing to change, from one of the earlier customizations, I added the ability to store the magic number in the base class. I don't use that in the actual base expert, but I can. So I'm going to put that code back in here. And then I'm going to change any uses of INP magic to M magic. I also, in the main file, have this trade comment, which I'm setting up as a global variable. It's defined in config. I'm going to take that out of the globals and put that into the leg base. So I just delete that to begin with. I'll go to leg base. Here I have the long magic. I'm going to add this string for trade comment. And then I'm going to duplicate these functions for the trade comment. Compile this one file to make sure that still works. So then here I'm going to update trade comment. And again, I'll update any instances of INP trade comment to use the variable. And I'll also remove this from the main file. Now back to the leg, I can see that I have this onTick which does almost the same thing every time. So I'm going to take that and make it into a common function in the base class. You can see I already had a function there that didn't do much and I wasn't using it. I'm placing it, so I still have the check for symbol info refresh rates. I'm going to check for anything to close, but I'm going to do that by calling a function for close. And that function will return a Boolean, so basically if it fails, I'm going to return at that point. And it will just replace this code, and then the new trade entries will be the same thing but for an open function. So I need to define this onTick. It's already defined here because there was a function, but I'm just going to make it virtual. I have no reason to override it, but just in case I come up with a customization later that needs that, I can just simply create an onTick. And the way I'm going to deal with this, if I go back to the leg, I'm going to have to create functions for this and this, which will be the open and for the close and the open. Let me just create them. So they only return true. They are Booleans, but they're only returning true because there's nothing else that can happen in here. I do need to define these functions, and I'm putting them in the protected space because they're not going to be called from outside. And now because I have those, I still have the onTick function, but I don't need that. But rather than simply remove it, which I can do, so I can remove this, and then any calls to onTick are just going to go to the parent. But I'm going to use it as a placeholder here, so instead of removing the function entirely, I'm just going to go and call the parent class. That way, if I do need to come back in here, it's easy to know that I have to do something here. But as I said, you can simply remove this and it will call the base class automatically. I think, yes, I forgot to change this name as well. I think I also forgot, because I've got this mmagic, I need to update trade comment, just as a starter value. onTick close is undefined, and that's because I forgot to define them in the base class. And I don't need that loop. I'm going to make this pure virtual by putting equals 0 there. That works. Let's make sure that GridTrader still compiles, and that does. So now I've moved the onTick function with just that basic structure of what happens in onTick into the base class, and I have these two specific functions, and I'm leaving those in the leg because I think that they will change based on the specific suggestion that I'm implementing. That's almost it for the leg. There's one thing I've missed here. I, in an earlier version, changed INP trade comment to INP trade comment plus app version. This is so the version number shows up in the trade comments. Now that, if I go back to GridTrader, I believe that will compile still. But if I just go to the leg and try to compile, I will get an error because AppMagic and app version don't exist. So I've used app version here, and somewhere else I've used AppMagic. That'll be in the input here. If I open the input and I attempt to just compile that, I always get this error, AppMagic undeclared identifier. If I compile from GridTrader, that works because those two are defined here at the beginning of main. But I do like to be able to compile the other files just to make sure I've got no syntax errors in them. And this really annoys me. So I'm just going to go into config, because everything includes config. And I'm going to add some lines here to just define those variables or define those macros if they haven't already been defined. Anytime I'm compiling from GridTrader, they will be defined here in main as one of the very first things. So that's not a problem, but if I compile any other file, it will bring in this config and I'll get a default definition. So that will take care of it. And now I can go to input. I can compile that and the error is gone. I can go to leg, compile that and the error is gone. And in GridTrader. Okay, so that's all of the changes for the leg. And I think the next thing I can get onto is the actual change that I'm going to implement, that will make it easier to make some of the customizations in future. And this change is to allow you to only trade in one direction at a time if you want to. So to make this change, first I want to create an enum that lets me have a list of the possible trade directions. I'm going to put that into this common folder. So I've created the enums file. I just need to define the enum. Okay, so I've defined trade direction buy as equal to position type buy, trade direction sell as equal to position type sell, and then I've just left default values for trade direction none and trade direction both. And the idea is that if you set it to buy, obviously it's only going to open new buy trades, and if you set it to sell, it's only going to open new sell trades. I've left a none in here, and you might wonder why I would have anything that's none. This will allow the expert to continue to close all trades, but it won't open new trades. And the same with buy. If you select buy, it will continue to close any existing sell trades, but won't open new ones. And the same then for sell. And of course, both trades both directions. Now, because I have this new file here in enums, I'm going to go back to the config, and I'm going to include the file there. Now that I have that, I want to add an input, which lets you select that direction. Which also means that I need that enums file in here. I need a set and get method for it. And then I'll just add an initializer here. The base class still compiles. And now with one simple change here in the onTick method in the base class, I can set the basic expert so that it only trades based on that direction. And this is why I defined the trade direction buy and sell to be equal to position type buy and sell, because I can perform this comparison. So if the trade direction is equal to the position type for the class, which is either a buy or a sell, or if the trade direction is both, then I'll carry on. So I've actually negated them. I've said if the trade direction is not equal to both and it's not equal to the particular direction of this leg, then return, which means I won't go on to the open, but I will perform the close every time. And that's how I'm achieving that even if you set this to buy, it will continue to close any existing sell trades. Okay, and that's done. And now I'll move on and implement an actual suggested modification to the grid trader. So now onto the actual suggestion, and this will be very short. I've received a lot of suggestions along the lines of only buy up to a certain limit, only sell down to a certain limit. So basically they're saying set up a range, and if you go above the range, stop buying, and if you go below the range, stop selling. And it's a way of preventing those outlier trades from existing. Those suggestions break down into three methods basically, and the first one I'm going to look at here is to manually set that range by entering a high price and a low price. Now I can do this and I can demonstrate it running, but I can't really show a result from that because setting those prices is subjective. It's based on your own interpretation of the market. And also I can't change those prices during the runtime of the strategy tester, so I can't really adjust them as you normally would in the market. I do think it's a good idea. You can set your own idea of where the range is. You can stop trading buy trades. You can stop trading sell trades. So you've got all the flexibility around that. I just can't show a verifiable result from this, but I can certainly make the changes. I've already created a version 2.010 from 2.0. So let's go to the main file. I'll just update the comment here. And so the first thing I'm going to need is an input for that. I'll go to the inputs. And I will want to use these values in the leg, so I'm going to do something in the base class for the leg. First, I'm going to add a variable here to hold that trading range value. And I only need to store a single value because I'm only going to set this to the high value for the buy leg and the low value for the sell leg, so I don't need to store both values in the leg. Next, I'm going to add a method to set that. And just to make sure I don't have an uninitialized value, I'll go down here and also set. Now I've put that value in the base class, but I'm not going to use it in here. I'm going to use it in the specific leg. What I'm going to do is create a new function, which I'm going to call isRangeOK. So based on an input price, this will tell me if I'm within the range. So as long as the M range value is greater than 0, which means it has been set, and the price is greater than the range value in the direction of the trade. So remember, this GT is a function that returns greater than in the direction of trading. So that would mean price is higher than the range value for a buy trade, or price is lower than range value for a sell trade. If that's true, then return false, because it means the price has gone past the range. If I get to this next line, then I just return true, so that tells me the range is okay for this price. So now if I go to the onTick open, and this is why I have a specific open here, I simply want to exit this if the range is not correct. So if not range okay, I'm going to return true because there's no point returning anything else, but I will not execute this to open a new trade. So that will stop me buying above the price limit and stop me selling below the price limit. All I need now to do is make sure that that range value is set in the leg. And I'm going to do that from the main file. Here where I create the buy leg and then the sell leg. Everything compiled. So now I'm going to run a quick test, or several tests, just to show that that happens. Grid Trader, I can see that I have inputs of trade direction. It's trade direction both. I've actually made it from 6.8 to 0.7. So I tested that and it didn't work, and I realize I've made a mistake. It's also in the version 2 here in the leg. I'm failing to set the trade direction here. And without that, it is defaulting to trade direction none. So I know there's not a lot to see here, but the price has gone down outside the range that I set. I have a lot of buy trades because the price is down low, but you can see I've got no sell trades left here at the bottom of the chart because it hasn't opened any sell trades once I got below that 1.068. Let that run a little further. And now on the other side, you can see I've got some sell trades open, but at the top here I don't have any buy trades left behind because it's not buying when I'm up at this level. So I can see that that's working. The value of this though is that you will be able to make your own judgments. Maybe once a week you go in and decide where the range should be for that week. You can then choose to maybe manually close some of the trades that are still open that are going to be outliers, or you can just leave them to be cleaned up. Because this will still attempt to close all trades, it just won't open new trades outside the range. So as before, this code will all be in GitHub. So if you have other suggestions, and I have 2 more suggestions in this range type trading that I'm going to be showing soon, but if you have other suggestions and ways to potentially improve the Grid Trader, please leave comments and I'll try to get through as many of those as I can. Thank you for watching.